Hello, Booktube. A really interesting multi-part discussion has recently surfaced on Booktube, and as in most cases when that happens, I not only want to weigh in, I also want to ask you a bunch of nosy questions about it, maybe get you to weigh in yourself if you have a Booktube channel, because it's a subject that's going to affect almost everybody that's listening to me. Criminolly made a video. I'm sure you've seen it, that it was in your feed, but I'll try to remember to leave a link to everything that I talk about down below. He made a video about his increasing lack of comfort with the Amazon ecosystem and with his Kindle, the various Kindles that he has. The hyper-commercialization of Amazon, the fact that your home screen is so much given over to stuff they want you to buy rather than stuff that's yours. It never really feels like your device. It feels like you're a temporary hostile guest in a storefront. That Amazon is hyper energized for storefront activity. And not all that customizable, and maybe not all that customer friendly. Of course, you've all heard stories about, the truth about your Kindle books that you download from Amazon, which is that you are renting them for exorbitant prices. I mean, an ebook should not cost more than a couple of dollars. And instead, they can cost a huge amount of money. And they have digital rights management software woven into them so that Amazon can remove them. You can't give them away. You can't bequeath them to your next of kin. As far as I know, you'd have to bequeath them the device, and the device would still be imposing the same limitations on the stuff that's on it that apply to you. You can't resell it. You can't do any of the things that you can do with a print and paper book, where you buy this, you go to a used bookstore, or if you went to a new bookstore, this is a modern library edition of The Bostonians by Henry James. This was $1.95 when it first came out. You went to a bookstore and you bought this for $1.95, which was $15 at the time or more. It's yours. You bring it home and it's yours. You can write in it all you like. You can tear pages out of it. You can customize it any way you want to. You can sell it right away to someone else. You can give it right away to someone else. Or it can sit on your shelf for years. And if at one point in that book a character uses a horrible racial epithet, well, it's going to be there on page 182 in 1935 and in 1965 and in 2005. It's not possible for someone to come into your home and change it. It's entirely possible for it to burn or get attacked by silverfish or eaten by a beagle, but it can't be altered. And Amazon has been periodically in the news for the fact that its electronic books aren't, you can't say that about them. Their electronic books are still their property. You're just renting them. So the combination of all those things, I think, was getting to Ollie and made him make his video, which is very thought-provoking. And I wonder how much it resonates with a lot of you. I wonder how many of the frustrations that he has for the Amazon ecosystem, maybe not so much for his Kindle devices, although I got a hint of that as well. I wonder how many of those frustrations hit a nerve with you when you watch the video. And they definitely hit a nerve with Bookless Pete, another booktuber who made a response video to Ollie, basically airing a lot of his own frustrations with all aspects of the hyper-commercialization of what Amazon does and how that has flattened the landscape, how it maybe you don't want to be entirely an inhabitant of the sprawling Amazon ecosystem. Maybe that's hurting the variety and the freedom. As Bookless Pete says, Amazon's perfectly happy to sell you any of the books that it shows you. But who knows what it's not showing you and why? Who knows what competitors are being ruthlessly excluded? Who knows what indie authors aren't showing up on Amazon because they wouldn't play ball with Amazon? Gigantic combine mercantile practices that are, I admit, completely unsavory, although so far have skirted just north of the law. And these videos prompted a response video from Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads, who is a willing, I would say even an enthusiastic inhabitant of the Amazon ecosystem, and often falls prey to the digital book deals that they offer, the Amazon crack that they offer, where you will get daily deals, all sorts of savings, where you can get, here's a book for 99 cents. Here's an ebook for $1.99. Here's an ebook for $2.99. Are you really caring about $2.99? And as he and others have pointed out, Ollie points it out in his video, those add up. You start to look at what you spent on those bargain ebooks. They were a bargain at the time, sure, but A, you don't own them. You're still not owning them. You're still renting them. And B, those 99 cents, $1.99 things, they add up to a lot in a year. I had to smile. I always smile when book people make these kinds of arithmetic exercises, because it's not like they're going to spend that money. They always come to the horrifying conclusion, that's £2,000 a year, etc., etc. But it's not like they're not going to spend that on books anyway. So I always chuckle just a little, because when they reach the staggering total at the end, there's always this note of appalled shock, as if there is my country house down payment. It's still going to be books. But Greg brings up a couple of points from his own professional background as a bookstore manager, assistant manager for a chain bookstore, and then all the experiences associated with that. And that made me think about making a response video of my own, because I also had experiences like that. I am a willing inhabitant of the Amazon ecosystem. And I was there at ground zero when this whole change was happening to bookstores. I was working in a chain bookstore, Barnes & Noble, here in the United States, when Amazon was launched. And when suddenly, or not suddenly, gradually, over the course of months or maybe years, customers started mentioning it. Suddenly, at my information desk, I could no longer avoid the reality that some customers weren't buying print books. They were buying electronic books elsewhere, and maybe for a lot less money. I didn't think anything much of it at the time, because it still seems so inconvenient. I mean, I quipped a number of times to customers at my information desk who said, well, what are you going to do about this? How are you going to match this? And I said, you're already here. You're physically here. We're talking to each other right now. You have the book you want in your hand. What could be more convenient than that? For it to get, an electronic file to get delivered to some Filofax or BlackBerry or whatnot? And I also watched at ground zero the realities of that changeover that a lot of people who comment on this either don't know or don't prioritize enough, which is that real estate went insane at this time. I often hear people just offhandedly say that Crocs and Prontanos, then Barnes & Noble, then Crown, then Borders put small indie bookstores out of business. I used to hear that all the time. When I was in the business, I heard that all the time. And I still do. Sometimes when brainless magazine think pieces come out on the subject, they will often recite that as if it's just ordinary wisdom, just a commonplace thing. We all know this. Let's move on from there to figure out what we can discern from that, when that is largely not true. Plenty of indie bookstores, plenty of bookstores that weren't part of any chain, had a chain move in right up the street and continue blithely right through this alleged catastrophe, because they had loyal customers who were willing to come through the door. And much more importantly than any of that, they had either a sweet deal on their property or they owned it. It was real estate that killed all those mom and pop bookstores, and mom and pop stores of every other kind. It wasn't the chain bookstores. It was real estate. And real estate is still completely, insanely out of control in the United States, and I have to assume in the rest of the world. You go to a Boston bedroom suburb, so a place that's largely outside the reach of the subway system, so there's a commuter rail. Maybe you're an hour away from the city proper. You go to one of those communities, it doesn't really have, it's basically a satellite of Boston, so it doesn't have a downtown of its own. It doesn't have a school district to speak of. The main point of living there is that you're an hour's train ride away from Boston, where all the museums are, all the shops are, your job is, your satellite jobs are, your gym is, all of it is there, and that's where you're going out to this exurb, basically to sleep and to have your weekends. And you will go to the seedier side, the south side of this exurb. A real estate agent will show you a building. It has seen much better days. The landlord is not on the premises. The landlord is not in this country. There's a property manager who lives in Manhattan, 5 hours away. And there's an apartment in the back. If you walk up these stairs, they're not very wide, so you can say goodbye to most of your furniture. You won't be able to get it in here. You walk up these stairs to this back apartment. Here, I'll show it to you. It's got a little window in the back that faces a cement lot. The thing that you'll be able to watch there in all the seasons of the calendar are people shooting up. And then there are a couple of windows in the front on a rangy, gone-to-seed garden. And maybe, you'll look out those windows and you'll say, oh, okay, well, that garden needs repair. It needs some love. The land agent will right away say you're not allowed to touch the garden. You need the landlord's consent. And he doesn't live in this country. He doesn't live in this time zone. Doesn't speak your language. And his answer is going to be no. And my answer is no. So you're not allowed to touch that. But here you go. It's a shabby living room. It's got drop ceilings in the kitchen. There's a little leakage in the cabinets. The cabinets are old. You're not allowed to replace them. It's got a back stairway that's largely blocked. It's got a back lot. I wouldn't advise going out there at night. It's 2 bedrooms, a living room, a hallway, and a shabby bathroom. And you say, well, I wasn't looking for the Taj Mahal, so I guess this will do. The landlord's agent will tell you without any hesitation at all that he expects you to pay first and last month's rent, a security deposit, and a finder's fee that amounts to $15,000. And then he quotes you your monthly rent. For this crappy apartment, he quotes you your monthly rent. And it's a staggering figure. Just staggeringly high. You try to rent a place in Boston proper? A landlord's agent, and the landlord is not around. He's not there to help you. He will not fix anything. The landlord's agent will not fix anything. They will not be around to fix anything. And you're not allowed to do it yourself, or you're in breach of your own contract. Someone will show you an absolutely crappy semi-basement apartment. So there's one little foyer that's on ground level. It floods, by the way. And then there's the basement, which is where you'll be living. So the windows are at eye level. The basement wasn't furnished or exterminated fairly well, so there's a vermin problem. You flood as well. It's freezing cold in the winter. And the landlord's agent will show you this space. He'll walk you around a little of it. Answer some of your questions about why it seems to take 3 tries to get the tap to work. And then he will tell you, without the slightest hint of embarrassment, that the rent for this miserable dungeon of space is $6,000 a month. Your rent for this space is $6,000 a month. You're paying that money just to live here, just to breathe in these rooms. You aren't allowed to change them, and no one else is going to change them. You aren't allowed to improve them, and no one else is going to improve them. And you have to pay $20,000 ahead of time just for the privilege of breathing in these rooms for this enormously exaggerated price. The rent on such an apartment is $125 a month. That's what the rent should be. $125 a month. Instead, it's $6,000 a month. Well, that happened to the commercial aspect of society, too. Suddenly, commercial renters for space in buildings, lots, strip malls, found that the owners of those spaces were charging them an absolute king's ransom. The point I'm trying to make being a little bit of a digression there, but the point I'm trying to make being that when rents weren't insane, the chain bookstores, they weren't crushing the opposition. They weren't putting bookstores out of business. Those bookstores, as long as they could make the rent, they had their customers. Indie bookstores, used bookstores, they had their customers. And the chain bookstores showed plenty of stupidity on their own. It's not like they were these remorseless killing machines moving into the neighborhood. In his video, Greg mentions Borders. When I worked at the Barnes & Noble that used to be in Downtown Crossing in Boston, which closed because of rental insanity, the owner of the building was insane and decided to triple or quadruple the rent on a space that wasn't worth it and that never would be worth it. It's just... So he told his Fortune 500 company, who was his tenant, your lease is coming due, and instead of, I don't even know, instead of $20,000 for this enormous rental space that you have, I want $250,000. Instead of $20,000, I want $250,000. So the manager of the building, the contractor from New York, just stared at him. These people adults just stared at him. You have actually lost your mind. But as long as you could make that rent, The chains weren't putting you out of business. I used to go from my Barnes & Noble down the street to the brand new shiny Borders that opened up. Looked like it was the Clash of the Titans. It looked like it was the Battle of the Behemoths. So these two chain stores a block away from each other. I walked around that Borders bookstore. And saw insanity on display in terms of their ordering. Huge, ornate, or academic press, multi-volume sets of history or biography that just were not going to sell. Not a chance in the world. I knew that customer base in that area at that time better than anybody. I was looking at these choices and saying, there's no way you're going to sell this. And you've got 4 copies of it. There's no way you're going to sell any of this. What are you doing? What on earth is this? It was the attitude of a super chain that thought it had money to burn. And they didn't. They went out of business. And Barnes & Noble only barely hung on by its fingertips and needed to bring in a venture capitalist, which is always a bad idea. I know the particular venture capitalist that they brought in, the particular guy, has a very warm and fuzzy, tweedy face to him, but venture capitalists only do one thing. In the end, they only do one thing. Sure, your little inlet in Scotland might have a bull shark who seems very friendly, and he swims into the inlet, and he'll swim right up to people and take little scraps of food from their hand. But bull sharks only knew how to do one thing. In the end, they're only knowing how to do one thing, and venture capitalists only know how to do one thing, and that's chop up a living organism, a company, into smaller bits and sell them off. That's all they know how to do. This wonderful lifeboat that has been floated for Barnes & Noble will eventually take that form, because nobody reads. And the people who do read largely read electronically. I don't know that there are figures to back that up, but anecdotally, personally, I firmly believe that. People might go on and on about how, the smell of a printed paper book, but they read electronically on their phone or on a Kindle, an Amazon Kindle. There are other e-readers out there. Of course, everybody has an iPad. You can get any kind of reading app on your iPad and read on that. People have the idea that reading on a backlit tablet's screen is harmful for your eyes. That idea has no scientific basis, but the widespread belief that it is tiring for your eyes is definitely true. Hundreds and thousands of readers point that out. That I look at a backlit screen all day long, and the last thing I want to do is look at a backlit screen when I'm reading for pleasure. It really is a strain. And maybe that those two things go together. But the idea that certain polls and certain public surveys have given in the last few years that people are migrating back to print and paper books, that they're a little bit tired of electronic reading, I don't believe that for a minute. Not for a minute. People are reading on electronic devices because the electronic devices are always there, because they are much more convenient than print and paper books, because most of all, the thing that I think drives the whole thing is that you can get deals. The deals that Greg mentions. You can get all sorts of deals. Try finding a deal at a retail bookstore, indie or chain. Try finding a deal. It's impossible. The books are staggeringly expensive. Unless you have an unbelievable amount of disposable income, which you're not going to have because your landlord's charging you $50,000 for your crappy apartment. Unless you have a staggering amount of disposable income, you're not going to go into a bookstore like you used to in the olden days and buy a bunch of books. You're never going to do that. It'll be a wild extravagance. You might go in for an overpriced coffee, but you won't go in for a $35 book, especially something you've never heard of, where for all you know, it could be a dud. Whereas online, online there are all kinds of options. I don't view that as a bad business model. I guess what I want to do in this video is second some of Greg's points and quibble with some of Ollie's and Bookless Pete's. A lot of the things that Ollie is complaining about in Amazon are just business practices. That's all. That you would counter the analog version at any store that you go into, not just any bookstore, any place you go into. There will be subtle maneuvering going on to get you to see things that you might not have known you wanted to buy or to make you want to buy them. Amazon does the same thing. Same kinds of things. And the solution in both cases is not for the corporate entity to do something different. It's for you to just control yourself. That's all. And the same thing is true for Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads and his Amazon crack. The key is to just control yourself. Just tell yourself, no matter how good the deal is, I'm not paying any money for it. You get plenty of free deals offered to you every day. And there are all kinds of websites where you can get all kinds of books for free. You could just make a mental decision. I am going to control myself. I'm not going to buy any of this stuff. Then you don't get that cumulative number at the end of the year. Do you realize we've spent £3,000 on books that we didn't need? I know that I'm not one to talk, as I buy used books at a quite healthy clip. But I also go through them at a quite healthy clip and get rid of them at a quite healthy clip. I get rid of them as well. There's a backdoor. Whereas with your electronic books, most people, if they pay 99 cents for an electronic book because it was that day's deal, and they read it and it's terrible, most people are not going to delete that. It's just going to sit on their device. And the main point that I want to make here, the key element for me is not, therefore, those predatory retail practices. Everybody does that all the time. Some of them are less savory than others. Some of them are less ethical than others. When I worked in retail bookselling for a blissful decade, there was no hint of extending any of that beyond just the basic minimum. So if there was a big social product, a big social development, or a hit TV show, well, sure, we would collect some books about that and move them where customers could see them more clearly, but nothing more than that. It was in the benighted second decade that I was working in a retail bookstore that suddenly management changed. Suddenly, Bertelsmann and other big corporate entities who don't care anything about books, they're international business firms. Suddenly they started buying up bookstore chains and trying to run them as though they were widget factories, with the result that new, obnoxious, non-bookish middle management would come forward and say, well, we want to promote this book or that book because it's in the news, but we want you to promote it as well. As an employee, we want you to promote it as well. We want you to talk about this thing. I lost count of how many of those creatures I had to say, no, I'm not going to talk about something because you tell me to. Don't be ridiculous. No, I'm not a salesman for anybody's book. That'd be ridiculous. And I was, when I said that, largely unassailable, but there were plenty of newer hires who weren't unassailable and who were told, do it, or can you? Find somebody who will. Be easy to do. That's pretty unsavory. That's pretty awful. And I don't know how much of that you get in retail bookstores now. Again, I want to hear your own stories. But the element that I want to concentrate on is not the predatory retail practices. It's the devices. It's the Amazon devices. It's the now ubiquitous Amazon Kindle, which is their reading device. I've made many videos about electronic reading devices just in general. I do believe that they are the better mousetrap. I think that along the way, Amazon and Kobo and Barnes & Noble, for whatever reason, built a better alternative to this. This is a normal printed paper book with paste. It gets more brittle and more fragile as time goes on. And it has all kinds of limitations. It's useless in the dark, for instance. You need an ambient light source to read this. It's useless to you if you don't understand the cod French that Henry James occasionally lapses into. You get to some of that, to a passage like that, or a reference to Dreyfus, and let's say you're reading along and you're comfortable and you're far away from anywhere where you could look that up, and you don't know what they mean, and it looks like they're kind of important for that chapter. Good luck. Modern Library is not going to have a footnote explaining any of that stuff. Most of the time, 100 years ago, people didn't even think they needed to explain any of that stuff. It won't be there. Let's say it's 2:30 in the morning. Well, if that print is a little bit of a problem for you, tough. Nothing you can do about it. Use a magnifying glass or pick another book with bigger print. Whereas with the Amazon Kindles, that's not true. If we concentrate just on the Amazon lineup as opposed to the Kobo or the Barnes & Noble Nook, once upon a time there was far more of a reason to draw a hard and fast line between those, because for a long time Amazon Kindles did not take EPUB files. You couldn't sideload an EPUB file, it wouldn't open one. They could read PDFs poorly. I don't think there's any e-ink e-reader that reads a PDF well. And they would take Mobi, a Mobi file. Amazon Kindles would take Mobi files. You could convert an EPUB file to a MOBI file, but it added all sorts of intermediary steps, and that's not true anymore. It hasn't been true in quite some time. Amazon Kindle devices now take EPUB, so there's functionally no difference between the devices in terms of what you can read, just in terms of how you can read, which is a big deal. That is a big deal. That makes or breaks an e-reader for a lot of people. One of the big deals, I want to show you some Kindles and show you some of what I'm talking about. One of the big deals when it comes to these e-readers is physical page turn buttons. An actual button that you use to turn the page on the electronic book that you're reading. Kindle made a great flagship item. They don't make it anymore. I don't think it's been updated. I don't think it's going to be updated. The Kindle Oasis, which has a wider bezel on one side and page turn buttons, and also a gyroscope. So you can put the page turn buttons on either side depending on which hand you want to use. It also has a nice ergonomic factor in that the battery is underneath this grip, which is raised, so it won't sit flat on the table, but it's much easier to hold. And it's got a metal backing, a wonderful screen. It's a really quick device, even now, after all these years. The Amazon Oasis, the Kindle Oasis, is a really quick, good device. And you have the page turn buttons, if you want to use them. Kobo also has page turn buttons, but most electronic e-reading devices navigated away from them. I suppose it's because of economics. Page turn buttons add a whole bunch of extra stuff that you have to work into the device, and that will make it more expensive and a little heavier. So Amazon came out with what I consider to be the platonic ideal of an e-reader in almost every way. The Paperwhite, which has no raised bezels. They're all uniform along the side, and it has no page turn buttons. It's just a flat piece of boring plastic. And you turn the pages by tapping the screen backwards or forwards. It lasts a lot longer than the Kindle Oasis on a single charge. Long time before you need to think about recharging this. Even I feel that way, and I use my e-reader a lot. You'd think I would deplete the battery pretty quickly, but I don't on any of them. There's only one major use problem with this device. It has a light, so you're not dependent anymore on whether or not there's ambient light. And of course, with an e-reader, any kind of e-reader, you don't have any of the limitations that I described with that print book. If you long press on a word or a phrase, you will be offered a definition of what it is, an explanation of what it is, a translation of what it is. If you go into your settings on any book, you can change the font size so that if it's 2:30 at night and you don't want to stop reading, but you want the words to be bigger, fine. A lot of them have text-to-speech so that you can have the book talk to you. It solves all of those problems without a backward glance. It solves all of those problems. It is a better mousetrap. The only problem with the Kindle Paperwhite, which is really the basic, just the example of an e-reader. It's just a thing that you have. It's not meant to be flashy on its own. It's meant to just get you into a book. The only problem with this thing, I have to believe, is intentional on the part of Amazon, because it's a huge design flaw, which is that the power cord, the power button, right down there, is exactly where you rest the device on your hand. Insane. Absolutely insane. Obviously insane, since we know that the technology exists to get around that, whether you have page buttons or not. The technology exists to get around that. But there it is. On so many of these basic Kindle devices, these Kindle Paperwhites or the basic Kindle, so many of them have the power button in exactly the wrong place. The Kobos have it back here, recessed on the back cover. So there's no chance of you hitting it at all. You have to reach into a little depression and push it in order for that to happen. Amazon, the Barnes & Noble Nook's the same way. This is just, I believe, designed to push you to buy a case for your Kindle Paperwhite. You buy a case, all of a sudden, that's not a problem. If you have just the device, it is. And it's a small thing, but I think these things are ruled by small things the more you use them. And it's the only small thing with the Kindle Paperwhite. It's the only small thing. And it is entirely possible for you to train yourself for it not to be an issue at all. I have done it. If I can do it, you can do it. But Kindle also has a basic Kindle, which is not a flat screen. It is bezeled. So it's got raised bezels there. The BroTube tech reviewers, when they were talking about this thing when it was brand new, said that it accumulates dust and lint. I don't know where they live. I don't know what kind of 19th century boot blacking factory they live in. I'm not exactly Mr. Clean. I've never had to deal with dust and lint collecting in the tiny bezels, the tiny little corners of this device. This is lighter than the Kindle Paperwhite, and it has the same design flaw, the power button right where you rest the device in your hand. But it's cheaper, and this one is blue. and all of these iterations, the further along you go, whatever they are, whether it's the new Kindle Paperwhite or the new Kindle so-called Basic, they're all going to be faster. The pickup will be faster. The things that you ask it to do will be faster. So, for instance, if we go all the way back to this Kindle Oasis, which is an older device, if you go into the text that you're reading here and you want to highlight something, which you can do here, you don't need a pen or paper, you don't need to worry about space, you can highlight to your heart's content. If you ask it, you long press on a word because you want to highlight it, it will be a nice, solid, leisurely beat before the controls appear on the screen. Whereas with the much more, allegedly more primitive, so-called basic Kindle, that'll be incredibly fast. You want to highlight something, it'll be incredibly fast. It'll pop up right away. And that, of course, the specs are just blown out of the water by Kindle's new flagship, the big Kindle Scribe, which does not have page turn buttons, but it does have this wider bezel on one side. So it is, and it itself is raised off the ground by these little feet. So this is a pretty comfortable reading experience, and I won't say corrects, because it's not a fault. You know what you're getting into. But with those little e-readers that I showed you, there's one huge thing that you maybe don't notice when you're all caught up in the technology, and then you suddenly realize those screens are tiny. They're the size of a piece of toast. This is the size of a book page. And that means something. It's odd to quantify, but it means something. Here, this feels much more like you are reading a book, because it's the size of a book's page. And the Kindle Scribe is lightning fast. In all of those very basic applications, it's got a much better processor because it's built to do more than just read. It's built to write. You can get a stylus and write on this thing. I never do. But I use it just for reading. But it often answers a reading need. I think it's an interesting process that goes on. Probably you've had it happen to yourself. That when you have a selection of these things, whether it's Kobo or Barnes & Noble or Amazon, eventually readers accumulate e-readers. Eventually they do. Somebody has one, they upgrade, they give it to you, that sort of thing. Or you buy one on a great deal for Amazon, on Amazon's website. And eventually you accumulate e-readers. And that allows you to triangulate on what things are maybe important to you, that maybe you think about. Like, I have these 4 Kindles that I showed you, and I can attest that the page turn buttons end up being pretty important for me. I go back to the oldest of them all is this Kindle Oasis. I go back to it more often than I do the others, simply for the tactile experience of the page turn. And I wonder if that's true for you, and how true that is. What do you think about all of this whole subject? Do you dislike being in bed with Amazon? Do you dislike the limitations they put on their products? I recognize those limitations for what they are, but then I look at what Amazon offers, and it's amazing. It's just, there's no other word for it. I mean, you're paying, yes, and they're constantly wanting you to pay more. They're constantly trying to suck you further and further into their ecosystem, but boy, oh boy, do they deliver. Hundreds of thousands of indie authors, for instance, that you will never see anywhere else, that are not available in any other ecosystem, certainly are not going to be visible at your bookstore. But also more than that, tons and tons of programs that you can do free. There's plenty of free stuff. There are also programs you can sign up, like Kindle Unlimited, that do cost you a monthly fee, a relatively modest monthly fee, that unlock huge amounts more potential in the Amazon ecosystem, the ebook ecosystem. There's tons of daily deals, tons of stuff like that. And as to the caution about how, they could reach into your device and take any book they want or change it, Greg, in his video, points out that that's not going to happen. Realistically speaking, that's not going to happen. They have millions of readers, millions of devices out there. The chances of that happening are the same or less than the chances that one of these things is suddenly going to get termites or silverfish. You run the risk with these things, you don't even think about it. It's not like you see a used bookstore, at a used bookstore stall and think, I'd better not get it because 20 years from now something might happen to it. You don't think that. True, there are limitations involved in that you can't resell them, you can't give them to people. Those are limitations and those are obnoxious. But how many times do you want to do that? It's right. You have to look at what's offered in the marketplace that offers it in connection with the likely cases. I think Greg is correct in saying that this ecosystem presents you with far, far more opportunities and freedoms and choices than it does limitations. This is the way I look at it, anyway. True, Amazon is the avatar of an ill that besets our society, and that is only going to get worse until catastrophe resets it completely. And that is the fact that 40 men own all the wealth in the world. That is really, really bad. That kind of wealth disparity has never existed before in the history of the world. And wealth disparities like it in history have never had anything but tragic ends. There's no way that this won't. So, of course, yes, it's wrong that the guy behind Amazon is both a morality-free ghoul and also a trillionaire. That, of course, is bad. But there's nothing any of us can do on the world stage about that. It's not like we're going to spill a hot drink on him at Davos. Instead, we have to deal with the marketplace at our end of the spectrum. And Amazon presents a really, really good bookish marketplace, a really good bookish experience. Not just in terms of what you can buy, but in terms of how you can consume it. And it is possible with Amazon devices now, more than ever, to sideload stuff onto them. That is entirely possible to do. You're not limited only to what you buy from them. So I come down largely in favor of this phenomenon that we have all lived to see. Most of the people watching this video were alive in a world before this Amazon store for everything existed. And now we live in a world that has been fundamentally transformed by it. I don't remember the last time I bought groceries at a grocery store. I don't remember the last time I had a particular need for anything. Dehumidifier? Grounding tape for a rug that slips? Laundry detergent? When have I had a need for any of those things that Amazon isn't right there? Competitive price delivery. We all live in that world. That has changed the contours of our world. I think for the better. But what do you think? That's the main thing I want to know. I will link to all the other videos, but the main thing when discussions like this come up, I'm always incredibly curious to know what you think. How much do you use Amazon? Do you have a Kindle or more than one Kindle? And if so, how much do you use it? Do you use your Kindle when you have the same book in print and paper and paste up on a shelf somewhere? I've lost count of how many times that has been true for me. It has to be true for some of you. And does it make you feel guilty? I'd love to hear about it. Where do you stand on this? Do you ever feel the way that Ollie and Bookless Pete are sometimes feeling these days? That maybe you want to get out of Amazon completely? Just get away from it? Are you bothered by how persistently they push their wares on you? Or offer you the ability to pay for them not to do that, which is, again, a typical mercantile economic thing. Are you bothered by that and maybe by their crappy business practices to the point where you don't want anything to do with them? And if so, tell me about your alternatives. The alternatives are fascinating too. But I wanted to weigh in a little bit long here because I told angry anecdotes about the real estate market. It bugged me when customers would come in and say, "Oh, how's it feel to work for the devil?" I'd say, "I don't work for the devil. I work for a bookstore. And you're here to buy books. I'm here to talk about books with you and maybe find the book that you're looking for." We didn't put that crappily run little indie bookstore down the corner out of business. We didn't do that. You are not mind controlled. You're not forced to come here. And saving $1.75 on a new release is not a make or break thing for you or for anybody else. You could easily still go there, and you do still go there, and you do still buy things. The point isn't that Barnes & Noble moved down the block. The point is their rent was quadrupled, which we didn't have anything to do with. We were driven out the same way, eventually. As you see, I digressed again. I made this video a little longer than it needed to be by that digression, but it is a fascinating subject. I believe it touches on all of us. So where do you stand on the Kindle question Booktube's Kindle question 2024. Tell me everything. Or if you have a Booktube channel, make a video and tell the world everything. I want to know it all. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up at long last, but I'll be back. Thank you, Booktube.